The Senate now has before it for final consideration Senate Bill 1389. The Secretary will read the bill.
In the Senate, Senate Bill number 1389 by State Affairs Committee, an act relating to concealed weapons, to revise provisions regarding concealed weapons and to
Mr. President.
Senator McKenzie.
Mr. President, I ask we dispense, unanimous consent that we dispense with further reading of Senate Bill 1389, but our journal show we read it the third time at length, section by section, and it's before the Senate for final consideration.
Hearing no objection is so ordered. Senator McKenzie is recognized to open debate on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't know if I can make this debate as interesting and passionate or as long as the debate on tax deeds, but it's a subject I'm interested in, and it may be one philosophically you've made a decision on, but I want to explain what it does and hopefully address your questions on it. The intent of the bill, which you can see just as you read through it, is that it does three things. First, under our current law, which we've had since we've been a state and a territory and beyond that, you've been able to conceal carry outside city limits without a permit. This clarifies that applies only to law-abiding citizens. And so what we did is on page 2, where they have the current provision that says you can carry outside city limits. We put the qualifications is that you're over 18 years old. You're not otherwise disqualified from being issued a license under Section 11. And if you go to Section 11 of that code section, which starts on page 4, those are the prohibitions that would otherwise prohibit you from getting a permit. So there are things like charged with a crime, adjudicated guilty of a crime, fugitive from the law, dishonorably discharged, been found mentally ill as defined in Idaho Code, or are otherwise prohibited from possessing a firearm under federal or state law. That was an issue that was important for the sheriffs that we put that clarification on. And that's one of the reasons we got this bill so late is we did a prior draft of this trying to fix the sheriff's concerns. And then we had a number of citizens saying, hey, you took away the rights of those who are 18 to 21 years old to carry permitless, which they've always had. So that's why we came back and we've got this bill at this time. The second thing this does, which I think is probably the most significant part, and it provides that right to conceal carry with a permit also applies now within city limits. And it applies to those who are over age 21, residents of Idaho, and then are not disqualified from being issued a permit under Section 11, which is that list of disqualifiers. As far as I could tell from our research, the disqualification for within city limits was put in code about 1909. And we were a very different state demographically at that time. Most people lived outside city limits. They worked outside city limits. They did their recreation outside city limits. And now we have a different culture and different demographic where I think most of us now reside within city limits. And so if you're going to or from your home, your place of work to recreation, you're going to be affected by that restriction, which most people at that time were not. And so as a policy, I think it makes a good policy to keep it consistent between the two. The third thing this does is that it provides if you're 18 to 21 and you want to get a permit so that you can carry within city limits or have reciprocity with other states, that you would get a permit you'd go through the process that we have for the enhanced license. So on page 7, it just says if you're within that age range, if you want to get a license, you'll go through the training for the enhanced license, but you get an 18 to 21-year-old license, which is it's distinguishable from a standard license. But because you've gone through that, when you turn 21, you have the option of getting the enhanced license. And then I should also note on page 8, where we have places where you're prohibited from carrying, courthouse, juvenile detention facilities, jails, public or private schools. We clarified that that also applies to anybody who would carry permitless under this section so that they couldn't carry. But we put in there some exceptions which we probably assumed were in the law, but the law's applied as we write it. And so we said police officers acting within the scope of their employment could carry in a courthouse or juvenile detention facility. Security personnel while engaged in their employment are persons who are authorized to carry a weapon by a person, board, or other entity having authority over the building or facility. So that could be maybe our state court marshals or security personnel or just law enforcement as they're going in and out of court to testify or not. They're not going to be violating the law. So that's basically what it does. I think someone had passed out this frequently asked question sheet from the NRA, but you've got that because there's some questions about whether this would allow somebody who's prohibited under state or federal law from lawfully possessing or carrying a concealed weapon under Idaho law. It doesn't change that, and we're specifically bound by the federal law and the state law. There's several other states that have done this. Some of them had it for years, decades. I think Vermont is one of those, Alaska, Arizona, Wyoming, Kansas, and Maine, and then West Virginia added it this year. Of those states, they just haven't seen changes in crime rates that as a result of this or anything. It's just kind of been consistent with what Idaho's seen with our permitless carry in the counties. Law enforcement, the Sheriff's Association voted to support it. The Fraternal Order of Police, which is the largest law enforcement organization in the state, and they're mostly kind of the frontline officers who actually are out on the streets dealing with things, voted strongly in favor of it. And if I could just briefly read from, I think it's a March 14th letter from the Fraternal Order of Police to the Senate State Affairs Committee.
Having identified the source, the senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just in their letter of support, they just wrote, law-abiding, mentally sound, and responsible gun owners are our partners in keeping crime rates low in Idaho. So they see a benefit from that. States that have had permitless carry, like Idaho has, have not seen increase in firearm accidents or misuse because of that. And this does keep in place our existing permit system. And most people will go through and get the enhanced permit because they want reciprocity in other states. And we do have one of the better permits from the states. I think we get reciprocity from 39 states, which is pretty good if you want to go on and get that. And so that's what it does. I think the language is pretty short, and it's just really kind of the policy of whether we want that concealed carry law to be consistent between the cities and the counties. And so, Senators, I'll just offer that to you and open up debate.
Debate being open, is there further debate? Senator Schmit.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm trying to read the bill and study it, and I just have a question for the sponsor. I'm very sorry, but I can't figure this out on my own.
Senator McKenzie, would you respond to a question from the senator from 5?
I would.
Senator from 5 to state your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My recollection is that we passed a law a few years ago about carrying weapons on campuses. And now if a campus is within city limits, I'm trying to understand how these applications and restrictions that we had on that law and these allowances interact.
Senator from 13 to respond.
Thank you, Mr. President. And that's a good question. I should have addressed that because it was one of the frequently asked questions. Under the law that we passed, you have to have either enhanced permit to carry on campus. You have to be over 21 or retired law enforcement with so many years of service. And if you carry on campus and you don't have those, it's a misdemeanor. So that still applies. So those limitations we put in place still apply, and this doesn't change that.
Follow-up?
Senator from 13, would you respond further?
I would.
Senator from 5, state your question.
And so then, but there were also prohibitions about areas on campus that were not allowed, even with the enhanced concealed. And so doesn't this change that?
Senator from 13 to respond.
Mr. President, no, it doesn't change that. So we had auditoriums over a certain size, I think classrooms, and there's some other restrictions, I think dorms as well. Those specific restrictions are still going to apply.
Thank you.
Is there further debate? Senator Stennett.
Thank you, Mr. President. Debate the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. We all know that all of us, pretty much I could guarantee everyone in the room, believes that Idahoans have the right to bear arms. But we also should believe that exercising those rights should come with responsibility and accountability. Surveys of Idahoans agree. 62% to 81% don't want permitless carry. What is the harm, and why shouldn't we not require some basic gun training? The state requires basic training and a permit to drive a car because as a society we believe safe and responsible drivers benefit the greater good. Who wants to be on the road with an untrained driver? Why would we want to be around people who carry guns who are untrained? The current concealed carry gun laws work, and there's no good reason to change them. There are some things in the bill that disturb me that I want to point out. If law enforcement officials are to consider an individual's mental health as a disqualifier for carrying a concealed weapon, what criteria will officers use to diagnose mental illness in the field? This places an impossible burden on our law enforcement to ascertain on the spot, without violating any privacy laws, whether an individual meets the criteria as is stipulated in this bill. There are complications with residency requirements. Senate Bill 1389 does not define the parameters, duration, qualifications of residents of Idaho. If an individual spends 6 months in Idaho and 6 months in Arizona but keeps an Arizona driver's license, are they residents or are they prohibited from permitless carry, concealed carry? By what measures will this be enforced? These are questions that were raised if the bill is enacted and haven't been properly addressed. We've had chiefs of police talk about this, and you've seen it in our papers. The law enforcement are really disturbed, and I understand that there are those on both sides. But without the concealed carry permitting process, law enforcement is unable to clear an individual's criminal history while in the field. This puts our police in jeopardy. And finally, this legislation will affect concealed weapons reciprocity with other states. If an individual carries a concealed weapon without a permit from Fruitland, Idaho, and crosses over into Ontario, Oregon, with the caveat they will recognize Idaho's concealed permits, they will be breaking the law. This has not been addressed in this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate? Senator Rice.
Mr. President, I have a good friend of many, many years who is the chief of police in Parma, Idaho. And he sent me an email, and if I could read from that email, Mr. President.
Having identified the source of the email, the senator may read.
Chief Erickson said, I live and work in an area where most of the time there is but one officer on duty at the time, and backup for that officer is minutes away at a minimum. We treat every car as if the owner-occupant were armed, and I believe that most law enforcement officers do that. The concealed carry permit never did anything except perhaps let our guard down because we believe that someone who had a permit might possibly have been one of the good guys. However, the possession of or absence of a concealed carry permit does not tell me about the mental state or disposition of the person with whom I'm dealing. I've long felt that the permit was simply a tax on the law-abiding citizen and needed to be done away with. I trust Albert because I know him. I know his wisdom. I know his experience. I trust him. When Albert tells me that our current system actually would have the counterproductive effect of causing our officers to let their guard down because they see a concealed carry permit, that tells me that our current system actually makes it more dangerous for our police officers, not less. This change actually prevents that problem for our officers. It's a wise decision for us to make.
Is there further debate? Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. This has been worked on for many years, trying to figure this whole process out and deal with concealed carry and whether it's constitutionally guaranteed or not. I commend those that worked on this 1389 for their efforts and for getting it to the point where I think it really does make some sense. A couple of things that I would like to just clarify, just so that anybody on the floor might be listening. Oregon doesn't recognize any other state concealed permits. And you actually have to go to Oregon and make application for their permit, file your permit, fingerprints, and do a background check. And that's something I think is part of what these kind of debates bring about, is education of the public. And I think another point that needs to be made on educating the public, because if this passes and it's signed by the governor, it doesn't give you the right to carry on a campus area. It doesn't give you the right to go into the dorms or into sporting events. You're still restricted from that. So we haven't changed any of that. And so I don't think we're dismantling anything. But I was at a breakfast meeting earlier this week, and a really long-time friend of mine jumped me about this bill, and he said, "What are you guys doing over there? This is crazy." And I said, well, let me give you an example of kind of why I'm supporting it. You live in the foothills in Boise, and I know that you go hunting over in Oregon. I know that you go hunting in the Homedale and Marsing area. So let me give you an example. You leave your home and you drive through the city of Boise. I know that you also, when you're out because of snakes and other things, have a firearm on your strap to your belt. I know that when it's cold, you have a coat on. So you go through, you leave your house, you drive through the city of Boise, you go out Shinnecock Boulevard, let's say. Now you've gone through Boise, you've gone through Garden City, you're going to go through Meridian, you're going to go through Eagle, you're going to go through Ada County, you're going to go through Caldwell, you're going to go through Marsing, you're going to go through Canyon County. How many violations did you just occur because you have your coat on? So I think that it's important for people to realize this really is a pretty common sense piece of legislation, and I would urge your support for it. Thank you very much.
Is there further debate? Senator Hagedorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank the good senator from 13 for all of his hard work over all of the years that we have tried to make sense and bring common sense, good laws to the floors and pass good bills to protect our Second Amendment rights. Secondly, I would like to thank the good lady from 26, the good senator from 26. She made a really, really valid point. We teach our children to drive an automobile, yet we don't support teaching our children gun safety in our education system. Why is that? Why don't we take the time, spend the money to teach our kids good gun safety and practices? Yet we can't seem to find the will to do that. We've been an open carry state for many years. So the person that's open carrying a weapon on his hip is the same person that's going to throw his coat on and cover that weapon up. And that person got his training either through hunter education or maybe the military, or didn't get any training at all. Yet we've been an open carry state for many years, and we refuse to have our education systems teach our kids about the Second Amendment and teach our children how to properly use, store, and maintain the weapons that are allowed them in our Constitution. We've failed at that. It's time that we fix that. We are an open carry state. This, as the good senator from 20 said, does nothing more than protect that person who puts his jacket on over a gun. We need to teach our kids the proper use and safety of guns. That's where it should start. And this should be the impetus to start considering doing that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate? Senator Schmit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciated the sponsor answering my questions, and that put my mind to ease about some of the considerations. But I have to, and I also greatly respect your reference, the sponsor's reference to history. In 1909 being very different from now, and I agree. But I've looked at this, when we pass laws, I try to make sure that we're following the direction that our Constitution has told us about. And so I read the U.S. Constitution on this. In my opinion, it's pretty silent on, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a constitutional expert, but I think the Constitution is supposed to be read by all of us and understood by all of us. And so I look at the U.S. Constitution, and I don't think it has anything to do with concealed carry. I think it's pretty much clearly saying we have our right to bear arms. I think the Idaho Constitution does clearly address concealed carry, and it does clearly say the state has a right and shall reserve the right to regulate concealed carry. And so I think it is wise for us as citizens and as policymakers to consider that regulation. Why would those two, open carry, concealed carry, be different? I believe, just like the sponsor described, in cities, things can happen. You know, you're out in the county, you're out where you're comfortable, and carrying a sidearm makes great sense for some people. But in a city, you don't know all these people. And you don't know their intents. Just even law enforcement, who should have incredible skills with determining people's intent and thought processes, because they do this all the time, can't be sure. And so I believe the state maintaining the ability to regulate concealed carry is wise. So I will be opposing this bill.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, Senator McKenzie is recognized. Closed debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just be brief because I think it's kind of a philosophical issue as to where you stand, although I know those who either support it or oppose it don't oppose the rights that we have. I don't believe, or we share the same beliefs as to the right to carry. But I would just say, and to the point that we should require training, that would be a major change in Idaho law that we've always had. We've always had concealed carry without a permit outside city limits. We've always had the basic permit that just required training at the discretion of the sheriff, and I think almost everywhere hunter's ed suffices for that, which really isn't the kind of training I think that the people are thinking about, just relates to hunting. The issues about mental health, that's been in the code as long as I have known. And so that would be a change. The residency, we have residency requirements already in the existing code. And from those who work on this across multiple states, consulting with Dakota Moore, who works for the NRA, it hasn't affected reciprocity, and we've drafted in a way that we don't see that it would. And so I think it's good policy, as Senator from 14 and I think 20 have said. It really protects citizens from the unwary from unintentionally breaking the law. And so I think it's good policy, and it's consistent with our Constitution as well as the U.S. Constitution. So, Mr. President, with that, debate's closed.
Debate being closed, the question is, shall Senate Bill 1389 pass the Senate? The Secretary will call the roll.
Anthon. Aye. Bear. Aye. Bayer. Aye. Brackett. Aye. Burgoyne. No. Davis. No. Den Hartog.
Mr. President,
Senator Den Hartog.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, last year when we had a piece of legislation up regarding our laws as they relate to carrying a weapon, I was concerned that we as elected officials have a privilege and a right that our citizens do not. This legislation brings all of our citizens to the same equal status, that we're able to conceal carry without a permit. This senator votes aye.
Senator Den Hartog will be recorded as voting aye.
Guthrie. Aye. Hagedorn. Aye. Harris. Aye. Hyder. Aye. Hill.
Aye.
Johnson. Aye. Jordan. Keogh. Aye. Lacey. No. Lee. Aye. Lodge. Aye. Martin. Aye. McKenzie. Aye. Mortimer. Aye. Nonini. Aye. Nuxel. Aye. Patrick. Aye. Rice. Aye. Schmidt. No. Sidaway. Aye. Souza. Aye. Stennett. No. Thane. Aye. Vick.
Mr. President.
Senator Vick.
Thank you, Mr. President. One definition of infringe is to wrongly limit another person's rights. The Idaho Constitution does give us the right to regulate concealed carry, and we certainly still do that. Even with the passage of this law, we have many regulations on concealed carry. But this corrects, in my opinion, what was a wrong infringement on individuals' rights, and I'm proud to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be voting aye.
Senator Vick votes aye.
Ward Engelking. No. Winder. There's also a pair vote. Senator Lakey voting aye, Senator Buckner-Webb voting nay.
Roll call shows 27 ayes, 8 nays. The majority having voted in the affirmative, Senate Bill 1389 has passed the Senate. Is there correction to the title? Hearing none, title is approved, and Senate Bill 1389 will be transmitted to the House.